Hey, good morning, everybody. This is People of Substance by LemonSkies, and I am so excited to finally, you're the ultimate get, my friend, former colleague, Jonathan Webb. You and I met working together at the American Diabetes Association, and we would sneak off to the gym to lift some weights. So that was our bonding moment. And Jonathan now is the CEO of, let me make sure I get the name right, Association of Women's Health, Obstetrics, and Neonatal Nurses. So it's a big job. So I'm thrilled to talk to you. I have many questions for you, but please say hi.
Hey, Olga. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to connect with you and even be thought of as being a person of substance. I really enjoyed our relationship, and it's sad that we've had a chance to connect for coffee. We really haven't had a chance to catch up and have to do it over a podcast. But I'm really excited to do it and have this conversation today. So thanks for having me, and looking forward to our discussion.
Thanks for being here. So let's start with the easy questions just for warm up. How did you end up where you are today? What was your path into nonprofit sector and to leading one of the nonprofit organizations?
Is that an easy question?
Yes, it is.
So I've always wanted to be in a position to impact and influence change. Funny enough, when I was in high school, I was on my way to medical school. I wanted to be a doctor, and had gone through the process. I gotten accepted to a couple of medical schools and when I was wrapping up undergrad. And then I spoke with a advisor who encouraged me to consider at least getting a master's in public health, and because he thought it would make me a more well-rounded physician. So I deferred and decided not to go to medical school right off the bat, and focus on the MPH. And it really opened my eyes to population health policy, some of the challenges and issues that people were facing from a social perspective that impacted their clinical health outcomes. And I really fell in love more with the policy and the population health side of it than I did the harder core clinical medical experience. So from that point on, when I got my MPH, I started my career working for local health departments as an epidemiologist, understanding the stats and the issues and challenges that people were experiencing from a data perspective. And then I went on to be able to oversee groups of that were working on community health. So I oversaw community health divisions and mental health divisions, oral health divisions. And most of that was in the local government space. Mm-hmm. Then I realized and put together a couple of really innovative programming that I wanted to have a better understanding of the business background mm-hmm. of the industry and how to connect some of the dots, because a lot of the things we were doing from a health perspective were moving the needle, but I thought that the space, the groups of individuals who are working on these issues with us were mostly people in the healthcare space, in the public health space, but these issues were important to people in the business space, important to people in other sectors. So what was the way to kind of pull more people into this? So I got an MBA because I wanted to understand the language from different sectors, how to approach the work a little more strategically, and then use that in different ways. And that career path sort of took me more into the national nonprofit arena versus the local market. And I saw that as a way to affect change. When I started to see the real area, the ways in which I would like to impact change at an executive level, I then started to look at the types of organizations and the types of leaders in those organizations and the trends that those organizations were starting to face, whether it was a need for development, need for partnership. So I sort of did this environmental scan to kind of see what types of opportunities I might like, what type of leaders were there, what type of gaps might be existing in 4 or 5 or 6 years. And then I tried to identify ways to get to fill those gaps mm-hmm. with roles I was assuming, with projects I was working on. So hopefully when my number got called, I would be a value add because I had a good amount of experience in policy mm-hmm. development, a good amount of experience in strategic and fundraising development, a good amount of experience in programmatic development. So I looked for those opportunities. And when I was thankfully offered the opportunity to take my first CEO role, it was a really, in my opinion, a culmination of all those types of experiences in one opportunity. If that makes sense.
It does. It does. So speaking of your leadership role, you're leading an organization that obviously focuses on women's health.
Yes.
And nursing, I think it's becoming a little bit more gender diversified, but nursing is still predominantly women dominated occupation. So I've been curious to ask you, pointing out the obvious here, what do you find the most challenging, and what do you feel like your own perspective working on these women's health issues and women's professional issues, what perspective you bring to it?
Well, I like the way you phrased it, because it's a little bit kinder than other folks have phrased it, and they've phrased it as, well, you're a man in the women's health space. How does that work? But I appreciate your framing of the question. So there are a few ways I can answer it. So one, I've had a background in a public health space for 20 years or so, and a good amount of those years have been focused on maternal and child health issues, because I really do feel like that the maternal and child health space is the foundation of our public health. I mean, it's the core of our family. It plays such a role. It impacts our future as a country. How we invest in that space is important. So it's connected. It's a really foundational element of public health, in my opinion. So that's the first thing. So my career has been focused in some way, shape, or form on supporting that population for the reasons I mentioned. From a maternal and child health space, I also believe that women's health should not simply be a woman's issue. I mean, we all have mothers, we all have women in our family, people who are dealing with some of the challenges that are impacting us from a women's health perspective. It should not be an issue that is women's health should not be an issue that's only a priority to women. Men should be engaged in the conversation and supportive and seen, hopefully, as allies in advancing policies and programs that support our family members in a way that will benefit our communities and our population overall. For me, there have been a couple of ways that I've approached this work that I'm, thankfully, knock on wood, has been beneficial so far. One is that I try to come into the work. I have academic, theoretical, and practical understanding of the issues, but I still want to enter this space with humility, because I know I don't. I'm not a woman. I don't know what it's like to walk in a woman's shoes on a daily basis. So even though I may understand some of the stats and the policies and those type of things, I still try to come into the space with a level of humility and a thirst for knowledge and understanding. And coming into those conversations in that way, I think has created a level of respect and trust that I've been able to leverage to advocate and be supportive of the issues that are important to my constituents and families they serve. There's also, I'm extremely appreciative of the community of women and those who I've had a privilege of working with, of inviting me in and bestowing that trust upon me to be able to advocate in the ways that are appropriate to move the conversation forward. So the challenge that I've had to navigate is being able to advocate for those issues without inserting too much of myself into it. I do have a personal stake, obviously, as a father of a daughter, as a husband to my wife, as a son for my mother. So I do have a personal stake in making sure this is right for them and for people like them. But with certain issues and nuances in certain issues, I realize that I don't have the direct experience. So I need to be able to manage and manage my passion with the issues I mentioned, with the points I mentioned before, about doing that in a humble and respectful way that demonstrates myself to be an ally. The things that have been really successful is the fact that coming in with that listening approach, that humility, people are willing to engage, willing to share, thankfully willing to allow me to be supportive in the ways that feel appropriate to them.
I find you talking about humility very refreshing, because, not to point fingers at anybody, but our government is chock full of individuals that, presume to know what it's like to be a woman, but so I just really always have appreciated humility and just sort of your approach of respect and listening to others and not presuming. So I just really commend you on that. It takes far more confidence and grace to do that than to walk in all guns blazing. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I want to turn, this is something I've been personally reading about in kind of various health-related work that I do, the topic of disparities and, the outcomes, health outcomes, the link to diagnosis in different diseases, the quality of treatment, access to treatment, and ultimately the well-being of the patient or family member. So I want to ask you about disparities that you're seeing in your space and what is happening to counter some of those. I know in maternal health, it is quite significant. And so I just wanted to pose that as a discussion topic.
Yeah, it's a really important topic, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about it. So going back to even your first question, one of the things that has really motivated me to enter into the public health space is to really do my part as much as I can to raise awareness to some of those disparities and inequities that you're talking about, and then hopefully be able to either directly or indirectly through partnerships and conversations bring about meaningful change that I hope will level the playing field. So it's really this conversation and focus around health, what it means to be equitable, and the focus on health equity driving us towards equitable outcomes. So some of the things that I've seen in my career and definitely in this maternal and child health space, as you mentioned, the country is facing a maternal mortality crisis.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. has one of the worst maternal mortality rates among developed countries. And then when you look and drill down a little bit deeper, that disparity is even wider when you compare maternal mortality for Black women
mm-hmm.
And to the maternal mortality rate for white women. Black women are dying at 3 to 4 times a higher rate than white women. And when you look a little bit deeper and dig a little bit deeper into some of the reasons for that, the places that we've been over time have said, well, there's, from a race perspective, you may be more at risk for these types of diseases or issues or illnesses. Mm-hmm. So because you're genetically predisposed to some issues because of your race, and what we have thankfully shifted our perspective around over the last couple of decades is that has less to do with race and more to do with racism and the social determinants that are created around the racism mm-hmm. that are impacting our health outcomes. So what I mean by that is that at one point we were thinking that that the social determinants of health would influence our outcomes. So the environments in which you live, work, play, worship, impact your health. So if you're in a zip code that is devoid of green space, there's a lack of access to healthcare within a reasonable proximity of travel. If you're in an environment that has a great deal of crime and a lack of educational investment, those sort of if you're in a place where from an income perspective, you're not going to be able to generate as much wealth or income to support your family, those types of things directly impact your health outcomes. So that's where we were and have been for the last several decades. We've sort of added on to that mm-hmm. an understanding that those types of environments impact you from a generational perspective. So I may be experiencing some health outcomes that are attributed to generations worth of lack of investment and stress and challenges on a family unit that have impacted me and my offspring. So we've started to evaluate and evolve around that from a life course theory perspective. Now I think we have thankfully, in the aftermath of some of the more recent societal challenges, got to a place where we are understanding the role that racism has played in creating those gaps and creating some of those generational challenges, and creating some of those systemic challenges that show up in our social determinants, because the racism in those systems have impacted how we allocate resources to populations. So the disparities that I see on a daily basis, in women's health and maternal and child health and in public health in general, largely exist around some of those systemic racism issues that have in our space really grown up and become embedded in the work we're doing. While we're talking about it, though, I also would say that with this focus on racial inequity, there's also disparities that exist across geographies. So from a rural to urban perspective, there's also disparities that exist from across gender lines in terms of access and support. There's obviously also now we're seeing some of the disparities that exist across from a discrimination standpoint across individuals who are with different sexual orientations. So all of these groups, marginalized groups that have been long looked at as being other, have I think our system has been designed to disadvantage them. And then what you see is, because of that disadvantaging category and the ways in which we've not invested in those spaces that support them, you start to see that play out in the disparate outcomes that you're talking about. So that's what we try to fight against. There's some legislation on the maternal and child health space. Like one that I'm thinking about, the Momnibus. There's some things in there that will help to educate folks on implicit bias. There's some things in there that the implicit bias that exists in the healthcare system. There's some things in there around how we might treat and work with incarcerated women. There's things about how we might have access to telehealth to get into environments and geographies where you see maternal services closing down in some areas. So there's some investment that's happening in those spaces, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. I think one of the easier things that can be done, that you're starting to see happen, is how you infuse the viewpoints of individuals as partners in decision making. So to your point about legislators, when you're making decisions about reproductive rights, how many women are in those discussions? How many women of color are involved in those discussions? How many people have you engaged with in a meaningful way to understand the issues and ramifications of what a decision might be? And what you see across the table, it's starting to shift a little bit more now, but not as much as it should, is that there are people there are organizations and industries that are intentionally looking to diversify their boards, diversify their volunteer leadership group, diversify membership, so that people with different experiences are at the table, hopefully with shared decision-making responsibility, so that when policies are made, when programs are made, it's done in a way that factors in and incorporates their input, versus people who may be well-meaning and think they're trying to do a great job, but have done so without any input from the population they're trying to serve.
Blind spots. Well, and it's such a complex issue, because everything you're describing about kind of the historical factors and, certain diseases, sure, genetics play a role, but I'm not sure how extensive that is. But you could be, to put it very bluntly, you could be a wealthy woman of color living in the same neighborhood, going to the same doctors, the same hospitals, the same level of access, and your outcomes will still not be the same. Right. So, and that's kind of the crux of it. Yes, all the social factors, poverty, rural communities that you called out, but all things being equal, they're still not equal.
Well, and there's actually a good amount, you're right. There's actually a good amount of research around the allostatic load or chronic stress and the impact that has on individuals' outcomes. So you're right. You can have a Black woman and a white woman who have access to the same resources and all the things you just mentioned, be the same zip codes and all those kind of things, who may still experience different health outcomes. And what they're connecting it to is one of the things they're connecting it to is because there's several. Sometimes it's being heard and being listened to in clinical environments. When you say something is wrong as a Black woman, sometimes that's dismissed in a way that's not for a white patient. But some of the other pieces around the chronic stress and allostatic load is that going back to what I mentioned before about the life course theory, if you have been historically disadvantaged and you have experienced racism and stress at every turn, your body reacts to that physiologically and starts to produce more cortisol, which then puts you at higher risk for some of the chronic illnesses that exist. I have a colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Michael Liu, who used to be the assistant administrator for HRSA's Maternal Child Health Bureau. He's now on to other opportunities. But one of the ways that when he and I were talking one time, he explained it as almost like an engine that is always sort of revved up at the highest RPM. And if you never get a chance to downshift, then you put yourself in potential risk for having that transmission burn out. And for Black and brown women, the issue has been with respect to stress, you're always running at 5, 6, 7 RPMs at the highest level, and you never get a chance to downshift, which then puts you at higher risk for some of the chronic illnesses that we're facing. So you're exactly right. Even when you start to correct for some of those social determinants, until we can figure out ways to address some of that structural racism, to remove and reduce some of that stress, I don't think we're truly going to make the impact that we want to have on the outcomes that we're shooting for.
Yeah. Well, it's a topic we need to keep talking about and keep calling out, because until there's awareness and the will to kind of start countering some of that, it took generations and hundreds of years to build it up. So it will take, more than a moment in time to really kind of turn the tide. Now, Jonathan, when I was preparing for this conversation,
I'm scared.
Yes, it's a little bit of a curveball. So what I did not know about you, but I dug it up, that you once were a middle school science teacher.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you about that. And, what are some craziest moments or memories do you have from that time?
Craziest memories I can share. So yes, I was a middle school.
Don't mention the names. Don't mention the names.
No names. And it was crazy because I just happened, I don't know, a few weeks ago, I checked on a few students just because I was wondering how they were doing. And to think that some of these kids now are no longer kids, and they're doing really great things in the world. So it's been really cool to kind of do a spot check and check in on see how folks are doing. But yes, I was a middle school science teacher. As I mentioned, I was undergrad biology, chemistry. And I had always actually, in high school, when I was in college, I had always had, as I mentioned before, an interest in child health, maternal health, so and youth development. So some of my work was in youth development. So I had done mentoring for different organizations, and while I was in high school, while I was in college, and for a short period of time after college, I was doing youth development in that way. And when I started to get go on to get my MPH, I was wanting to work while I was doing that, and felt it was a really good opportunity to take my bachelor's education and combine it with a passion of mine around youth development, and serve as a middle school science teacher. And I will tell you that as much as I've enjoyed the work that I've been doing now, as much as I've enjoyed the issues that I've had a chance to work on, being a middle school science teacher was probably one of the coolest jobs and experiences I've had. Really getting a chance to engage with the youth in that way in a real time environment was so rewarding. And maybe this is a selfish thing, but it's one of the few professions in my experience, and others who may have done this longer may have a different opinion, but you can actually see the progress on a daily basis or weekly basis. So your cup is getting filled, even though you have difficult days, even though you have difficult parents sometimes.
Yes.
You can really feel the difference you're making in a kid's life when you see a light bulb go on because of something you said, when you can recognize they're dealing with some personal or family issues, and they feel comfortable enough to spend some time with you and see you as a person who they can talk with, and you can reference to other folks. One of the I guess stories that I would say is I was at that time much younger, and probably if you talk to my kids and talk to those kids, I was probably much cooler back then too. So I was the cool kid, the cool teacher. So during lunch hours, the kids would come back during their lunch hours and spend their lunch periods with me.
Mm-hmm.
I would always have a handful of kids in class who would just use that space to talk and play games and yada, yada, yada. And I would sit and talk and play games with them if I had time. If I didn't have time, they would still have the space. I'd be in there with them, but we would be engaging in a more informal way. So that really felt good, to be that connected to them and seen as a resource in some ways. I could also tell how protective they were of me and our relationship, because when I first met my wife, and she we dated long distance for a period of time, and she came to visit me one time, and she visited at the school, and the way the kids grilled her, I mean, all she needed was like a yellow light, the hot lamp, but they were grilling her mercilessly to make sure that she was going to be the right person for me. So that was we had a really good relationship, and I really missed that experience, but it was one of the most enjoyable times in my life.
That's awesome. I never knew this about you, but I can totally see you being, Mr. Webb, cool Mr. Webb.
I was Mr. Webb. I was Mr. Webb.
And our coolness factor seems to kind of plummet as our kids get into teenage years, but I'm told that it resurges at some point. So
I hope, because right now my daughter, who's 12, will tell me how some of the things I do are cringy.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you've heard that.
I have.
I'm cringy sometimes when I say certain things or do certain things. I'm hopefully it'll swing back the other way.
Yeah. I hear that all the time. I mean, sometimes it's merited, but mostly it's not.
That's right.
So, to kind of wrap up, you and I have known each other professionally, but also personally for a few years. So what's going on in general with your life? What are some things you're doing? You alluded to something that involves bicycles and water. So do you want to talk about that?
I knew I was I knew I was going to come back up with you, Olga, because I know you are a competitor, and I know you are goal oriented. So one of the things that is going on with me right now, one on the personal front, my son, believe it or not, is when we met, I was elementary, so I think all our kids were in elementary school, and now he's on his way to college or getting ready for college. So there's a lot that we're doing now in terms of the college tour process and getting him ready. He's a junior, so he's still got one more year, but getting him ready for that. So it's bittersweet, because I'm excited to see, where he goes in life, because he's I'm admittedly biased, but he's a really good kid with a lot of opportunity to do well and do good things in the world. He's got a really good heart. So I'm looking forward to seeing where God takes him and what he can do in the world. But it's also a little bit nerve-wracking because and bitter, like I said, bittersweet, because we've built a relationship with him here, and it'll be different to see what life will be like in a year and a half when he's not in the house, as I'm sure most parents have had to deal with. So that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. So personally, we're trying to prep for that, and that's taking a lot of time. Mm-hmm. But I'm also going back to the competitor, that I think that's one of the ways you and I bonded, competing on workouts and things like that. I am scheduled to do an Ironman, a half Ironman in about 6 weeks now. And there's a lot of swimming, biking, and running. It's 70.3 miles. So I'm looking forward to that. It's been a lot of training over the last 6 months or so to try to get to this place, winnow this down to a 6 or 7 hour experience. But I'm really at the point in my life. I've done triathlons before, not at this level, but I've done triathlons before. I've done marathons before, a marathon before. And I just really like opportunities to push myself, set goals, remind myself how important it is to be disciplined to achieve those goals. And because of the place I'm getting to in my life, just being appreciative of the opportunity to still move and engage. And one of the ways I can honor that is one of the ways I feel like I can honor that is to kick the tires on the body every now and again and see what it can do. So.
Well, on that note, and you don't have to worry about me competing with you because I don't like to get in the water.
I didn't know that.
No, I mean, yeah. I mean, I can swim. I just don't particularly enjoy it, and it makes my hair turn green. So
it makes my hair turn something.
I know. But I will be looking for updates from afar and wishing you best of luck, and hopefully weather cooperates. But it's wonderful to have you. It's wonderful to kind of have these conversations, and I love that we can talk about pretty big, important topics, and then also just have a laugh and catch up personally. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. It is a pleasure, and hope we get a chance to connect and really catch up. But thank you so much for the invitation. It's been fun.
See you soon.